And now I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Modestha. Modestha Mensah is a visiting scholar at our institute with an Argolanda scholarship. She's from the University of Ghana, also a lecturer at Cape Coast University, and she's going to do her talk, Sustainable AI Meets African Feminism. Take it away, Modestha.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm Modestha, like she said. Actually, this project is a joint project that Professor Weinsberg and myself are doing, the director of the institute. So I don't take the full credit, even though she's not here. Yes, so what we want to do in this project, first of all, present the thesis for the paper, just look at it here, and also look at AI use in Africa, what AI ethics is, and the necessity to engage with African philosophy, especially African feminist ethics, and also to show the ways in which African feminist ethics intersects with sustainable AI, and then we also give some recommendations. So the thesis of this talk really is to look at the situation where sustainable AI affords African feminist ethics the opportunity to address what the environmental impacts of the use, manufacturing of AI on the African woman's life, of course, Africans in general, but particularly African women. And so this necessitates that the people from Global South, particularly Africans, should be included in global AI debates. And we don't focus on women because they are special or they need particular attention, no. I focus on women because they are the most impacted by the environmental costs of AI in Africa. That's why I focus on the African women. So, is there a presence of AI in Africa? Yes, there is a presence of AI in Africa because most often Africa, in the general imaginations and image of people in the West, in Europe, have been a continent that is largely ignorant, very negative image. And so the first, second, third revolutions, Africans did not really have much to say, were not given the opportunity, or we did not assert ourselves enough. And it's the same happening in this fourth revolution of AI. And so what we want to bring across is the fact that when we talk of AI development and AI use, there are initial stages of this development and especially material sourcing, data labeling, and where the end products of the unused AI products ends up, that is the e-waste. In all these three aspects, Africa plays a key role in these early developments and the last stage of AI use, AI manufacturing. And so that is why we are saying that it is important for people to know that Africa is closely connected with the development of AI, even though the technology itself is not used on a large scale on the continent, that's true, but in terms of sourcing of material, data labeling, and the dump site for e-waste, Africa is renowned in all these areas. But aside that, there have been concrete efforts to make AI a feature in Africa. For example, we have this huge AI techs establishing hubs all across Africa. We have Google there, we have Facebook. They are trying to give access to Africa, usually being a continent with little access to these technologies. But the problem here too is that, you see, these technologies come with very high skills that these African countries do not have their expertise. So what you see is that, yes, there is a presence of these big techs there, but the people themselves are not really benefiting much because in terms of skills, in terms of expertise, it is the same people from Europe, from the West that are coming to occupy this position. And if you don't take care, it further increases the inequality gap that we are trying to reduce. And so we're saying that AI is doing wonderful for the human race now. Aside that, we also have local establishments, people who have had access, local people who have had access to AI training some way, trying to find solutions to indigenous African problems in the areas of natural language and processing and machine learning. Because of course, Africa is a country that is multicultural, several languages, and so we need such applications to make communication easier and so that we share ideas. So that is also present, and we also have some synonymous areas of Silicon Valley and all those fancy, fancy names that are known in the Western media and all that. So we have something called Silicon Savannah that's found in Kenya. We also have Sheba Valley, that's in Ethiopia, Yabakon Valley. So these kind of show that there are efforts by some African groups to actually make AI a thing that is going to stay in Africa so that we also benefit from this beautiful technology that is coming up. And then also, of course, we have programs run in universities. Sometimes they organize competitions in robotics, computing. And I'm very happy to announce that I think in 2021, the one that was organized, it's an international competition. A girls' school from Ghana, Eri Girls, won the prize, and it was actually mind-blowing. So this is just to show that there is some level of presence of AI in Africa. The next thing I want to talk about is, what is AI ethics? Yes, over the past few days, we've been attending sessions that are telling us the beautiful things that AI is doing. At one that I chaired, AI systems were used to predict floods so that the people could be relocated in time so they're not affected adversely by these floods. And that was just amazing. And we know several others. But there are also problems. There are problems that straddle between privacy, loss of jobs, effects of these mining elements that they use in producing the batteries and all that on people's lives, on people's jobs, and all these problems. And that is why there is an inception of AI ethics, so that ethicists are able to put designers on their toes, so that as they design, they implement, they develop these AI solutions, they also keep in mind that these are application solutions that should meet social integrity, social justice. So it's not just about the technology, but is it acceptable socially? And that is what AI ethics is doing generally. And there's been tremendous feats in this respect. And then what I am most interested in is a relationship between AI ethics and sustainable development, sustainable AI, sorry. Even though these questions that AI ethicists are asking in terms of effects of AI on jobs, privacy, trustworthiness of these AI systems, oftentimes there is lack of recognition for the environmental cost of these AI solutions on people, on the natural environment, on the human environment. And this is what the sustainable AI branch is trying to look at. As also part of the ethical debates on AI. That is what Professor Weinsberg is trying to promote. And this is how I try to locate myself in her, will I call it course? Yes, in her course. So that we see how these environmental issues are occurring on the African continent. Because of course she is here, she's representing Europe West. What about African continent? That large continent with people who equally use AI, whose resources are mined millions to power these AI systems. What is the effect on their natural environment? And so these effects that we talk about, they are in the areas of carbon emissions, e-waste, and how AI materials for AI powering are sourced. That is where I focus. Now, generally too, when you look at the debate in global AI ethics, yes, it's fundamentally focused on the rights of the individual, what increases individual flourishing, as that has been the dominant tradition in West and in Europe. And that is okay, but we also recognize the fact that the problems associated with AI, in spite of the tremendous, beautiful things that it's doing, are so complex that you cannot use only one system, only one value system to mitigate these problems. And this is the most important reason why you need to include other ethical perspectives, and why I ask for inclusion of African ethical perspectives in the whole AI debate. So this is the gap that I was talking about. In the AI debates, there is lack of voice from global south, particularly Africa. And that's not surprising because that has always been the trend. But I believe that if it's not good, then it has to change. And this is an effort that we are trying to make to change the narrative. So what can we say from the African perspective in terms of global AI ethics? Generally, ethics has been understood, if you look at the philosophy of it, has been understood, championed by Kant, by Rawls, by Mill, whether it's deontologism, whether it's utilitarianism, whether it's right-based ethics, whether it's Aristotle's virtue ethics. It is focused on the individual. What are the things that we need to know? What are the things that we need to know so that we can associate this as wrong or categorize this as bad or good or acceptable? This has been the general trend of ethics in philosophy, but it's a bit different from the African perspective. In the African perspective, yes, the individual is so important, yes, but the individual is so important that we recognize that without the community you are a member of, you cannot flourish and be the person that you want to be. And the idea is that as the community, the human community, as well as the natural community, that feeds you, that teaches you, that nourishes you, that gives you the platform, gives you the security so that you can be the best version of yourself. Therefore, you owe some form of duty to uphold the well-being of this community. That is the general framework of ethics from the African continent. And usually we call this Ubuntu. Ubuntu usually meaning humaneness. Some people translate it to mean you are a person only through other persons. So the main values of this Ubuntu ethical philosophy is that we encourage values like corporate living, interconnectedness, mutual aid, love, sympathy, solidarity. Why? So that there is harmony in the social groups that you find yourself in. And when that is possible, when the society you find yourself is secure, you, the individual yourself, you are equally secure. Because you always have people to rely on, you always have people to look out for you, to make sure that your needs are met. And therefore, instead of focusing on your rights as an individual, which is okay, we rather focus on what your duty is to the community that you belong to. So that if everybody is performing their duties, definitely you will be taken care of. And so that's not to say that we don't respect individual rights. We do, but we say that individual rights will always be guaranteed when the society is flourishing. Therefore, you should be more focused on your duties, your responsibilities, the well-being of the community, rather than focusing solely on your rights all the time. That is the Ubuntu philosophy that Africa is noted for. And in this respect, we're not saying that it's a monolithic, unanimous viewpoint. No, there have been several contestations. People interpret it in different ways. But I'm saying that this is the general outlook that you get, general understanding that you get when you talk about ethical frameworks from an African perspective. They will always stress, no matter the disagreement, they will always stress that corporate living, interconnectedness, mutual aid are most important. Even though you should be able to assert your rights as an individual, yes. But when it's conflicting with these other values, those other values are supreme. But there is also a problem here. If you look at the image on the screen, I don't know if it's just me. I hope you see it too. These are arms that show solidarity and all, but they don't look feminine at all. They look masculine arms. So the question is Ubuntu for men? Or it's for everybody in the society? Because we are trying to export this idea to the global stage that it will help to solve some of the problems that are currently recurring in AI technologies. And your guess is as good as mine. No, it is portrayed as masculine. Why? Because Africa is so patriarchal that systems, values are in the custody of men. Of course, that does not mean that women are stupid or we are dumb. We have wisdom, we have things to share, we have information to give, but we just don't have the avenue. Why is this? If you look at the philosophy of Ubuntu, which obviously has been championed by our African scholars, African scholars themselves, the philosophers themselves, are predominantly male. I can count only one female philosopher in West Africa. Of course, she's done, but just one. In my department, I'm the only female philosophy lecturer. I don't think I'm a philosopher yet. You know, so this gap calls attention to. Okay. This gap calls attention to what is the female's lived experiences in terms of the general Ubuntu framework for African communities. And the focus here is that even though Ubuntu is prioritizing the need to care for one another, it is in private and in public relegated to the female. It's a female's job. Meanwhile, that is the general outlook we try to portray to the world. Oh, Africans, we love each other, blah, blah, blah. We care for each other. But when you go into it, it is the preserve of women. So they provide the care for both the children, the sick, the vulnerable, the disabled, and all that. And that's not bad. But there are implications. The implications is that even though these duties are heavily burdensome, they demand remuneration, they demand reward. But these things that women do are not rewarded in terms of remuneration. Women are as well held liable for these same duties that Ubuntu has imposed on them. Because if a woman is supposed to go to work and there is an issue where she has to provide care for somebody in the home, while in public at work, she will be held responsible for not being present. But at home, she'll be required to stay. So there is this double standard. It heavily burdens women. And so feminist ethics is saying that, yes, we need to care for each other. We need to be supportive and all that. But it is not only the job of a woman. It's our shared responsibility. And linking this directly to sustainable AI, the same expectations of Ubuntu places women directly in contact with the environment because, of course, the heavy burden on them will not allow them to make most economic gains, so they will heavily depend on their male counterparts. And because of this, they are most intimately connected to the environment. They are doing their agriculture, they are weeding, they are clearing the land, they are planting, they're doing all that. They are the ones using firewood. And in Africa, over 90% of Africans use firewood as fuel. Even in the cities, yes, a few of them use charcoal. Of course, it's just select few. Some of us, we consider ourselves as fortunate. We use gas. Even that is not very much available. You have to spend so much. But majority use firewood. And of course, charcoal is also made from firewood. They have to go long distance to fetch the wood to fuel, to power their homes. Water resources is the woman who is responsible for providing water. And we all know the value of water. So the question we are asking is, if AI has ecological impact on our environment, it is these women who suffer it the most. If you look at, according to, Michelle 2022, I will quote this for you to hear. From 1990 to 2020, Africa has lost 3.9 million hectares of their forest reserve because Europe is shifting the energy transition from heavy fuel to these renewable, rechargeable fuels. And you need these materials from Africa because that's where they are. The cobalt from Congo, the lithium from Ghana, where I come from, the platinum, nickel, all these from Africa, and they are losing their forests. The forest that provides the wood, the forest that provide water resources, the forest that give them an avenue to farm so they can earn a living. And when they go through these disastrous outcomes, they are the same persons who stay behind and take care of their children. So these are the intersections between sustainable AI, which is focusing on the environmental impact of the use of AI, as far as the global trend is concerned. Now, what are our recommendations? We recommend. So this is just a picture of a typical African woman trying to do her job. Am I going back? Okay, sorry. I'm just wrapping. Is it my last slide? Yes. So what do we recommend? What we recommend is that please global AI ethicists should include other forms of ethical frameworks in the debates, because these ethical debates shape policy. African ethical frameworks, values are equally very important because we are impacted. And if you use our Ubuntu system to complement the systems you already have, it will go a long way. And for the women, I am open to questions. We will discuss more the solutions or recommendations that I have put across. On this note, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Modestha. So now we have some time for Q&A. Online audience, you can ask questions through the Q&A function. Don't see any questions there yet. Do we have questions from the room for Modestha? Tom again, yes, please.
Thanks so much for your presentation. It's great to hear about Ubuntu in a contextual way, contextualized sorry. Okay. Sorry, got distracted by some waving on the side. But okay, so sorry. My question are actually questions. The first one is I wonder if you could say maybe a bit more about how Ubuntu is different from or similar to other relational epistemologies, ontologies, and ethical systems. So that's question number one. And the second question is about appropriation of Ubuntu or decontextualization, specifically how it is almost like a buzzword in some AI ethics debates in the West now and in Europe. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, how it has become sort of like a buzzword for diversifying AI ethics and therefore, how it became decontextualized. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll start with the last. How do we decontextualize Ubuntu? Because it has become a fancy word now, I agree. Somebody puts the value of Ubuntu in a very categorical way in terms of ethics, that an action is good insofar as it promotes friendliness. An action is good insofar as it promotes friendliness. So it will be bad insofar as it reduces friendliness. Now, how do we apply this contextually? In AI ethical dilemmas, if you are stuck in between what to do in a particular moral dilemma, rather than look at, okay, this will promote, generally what has been used is the utilitarian principle. Oh, this promotes happiness for the majority of the people. And that's what thrives, actually. That is what is thriving for a very long time. How about you? Because not promoting the happiness of majority will not always work. Because what about the minority? You are constantly sacrificing them. Is that fair? No. But you are in the majority, so it's okay for you. What about those of us in the minority? You understand? But if you are looking at another framework that looks at something that promotes friendliness, what you are doing, will it ensure social cohesion? If it is no, then you don't do it. If it's no, then you don't do it. And another way is Ubuntu is inclusiveness. That is practically it. It's inclusiveness. So in your AI debate, include other various philosophical standpoints, whether Asian, Latin American, African. That is also a practical way of using the system. So that is just a way to say that in decontextualizing Ubuntu as a fancy word, it can be applied this way. I mean, I'm sure there will be concrete ways that it can be applied, but this is what I can think of immediately now. About the first one, whether there are similar theories. Yeah, I've seen a very similar relationship between Western ethics of care and Ubuntu ethics since I started with this project. That Western ethics of care also criticizes the heavily dominated male perspective in terms of what is right can always be universalized as either the Kantian way, the categorical imperative, or the male way that I just told you about. When it always promotes the happiness of the majority, it's good. I've seen that feminist ethics of care is critiquing this and saying, no, interpersonal relationship, care relationships are equally important in framing moral philosophies. So that is a similarity between ethics of care and Ubuntu ethics. But the difference I see is that Ubuntu ethics is not a choice. It's mandatory. You don't choose to care for one another. You must, because you owe your existence to the society. So it's more imperative. And coming from the feminist perspective, of course, Ubuntu places too much burden on the female because it privatizes care. We are saying that it should be publicized as well. These are the similarities that I see and the differences. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Modestha. We actually have a couple of online questions. The first question isn't a question, it's just admiration from Angela Ndaka saying, great presentation, Modestha.
Thank you.
But then we have an actual question from Stefan Ulrich from the Weizenbaum Institute. They're also presenting later today, I think. Thank you for the talk. I totally agree that we need multiple ethical perspectives and especially the voices of women philosophers from Africa. I hear you saying that we need a European-African Green Deal because our common digital future is so connected. Would you agree with that, Modestha?
Yes. Is that the question?
That's the question, yeah.
Oh, okay, of course. I mean, the world is a global village now. Whatever is happening between Russia and Ukraine is affecting us in Ghana, the small corner on the African continent, as well as here in Germany. So yes, Europe, Africa, Latin America. In fact, what I'm trying to say is global North and global South. Our digital futures are so connected that when we are looking at ethical frameworks that should guide how these AI systems are designed, deployed, and even repaired and all that, we should take into consideration different multiple perspectives from all these sectors. So yes.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another online question. Could you say more about what you mean by a flourishing community? Communities usually establish some social norms, not others. You just spoke about inclusiveness, but what happens with individuals whose way of life is incompatible with the common good, especially given that small communities in real life might not be very inclusive for minorities? At least they aren't necessarily in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, that has generally been the critique, that sometimes a community can be authoritative and thereby sidelining certain minority groups or groups they consider as not fitting the community. But that is why we say that it's not a silent consensus. It's debate. It's the people in the community that constantly change the values of these communities. So yes, for some time they have ignored people who smoke, for example. It is your responsibility as individuals to constantly question these values. And as you deliberate, you find common consensus, and the community grows. Communities and social norms are not static. They're dynamic, but it will take effort, discussion, deliberation for this to happen.
Thank you. Any more questions from the room? Yes, from Kerry. She put her hand first. Sorry, Georgie. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for your talk, and I really also enjoyed your reflections on ethics of care and Ubuntu and sort of the links between them. I was just wondering if there are any examples of projects that you think are starting to put into place some of the things that you were asking for in your final recommendations and kind of centering kind of this sort of feminist Ubuntu approach. If not, that's totally fine. I'd love to know.
The work is still in progress. I didn't say that earlier, but as it stands now, I'm yet to see projects that are actually including these perspectives, but I've seen recommendations that we need to look at these other ethical frameworks. Maybe by the time we're finished with the project, we will find people actually taking it seriously. Yes, sorry, but...
No, thank you.
If you find any, let her know. Then Dorji just pointed to Chelsea. Chelsea gets the last question then.
Thanks, and thanks, Modestha. That was a great talk. I just wanted to mention maybe, and not to decontextualize too much, but there's work in disability ethics and feminist disability ethics that really emphasizes dependency as something that is not just kind of a necessary aspect of everyone's lives, but it's something that's really valuable, right? That we are dependent, kind of fundamentally dependent creatures is something that is... in the West, it's treated as like a flaw, right, or something to be overcome, but it's actually maybe like something that's very, very important and something to be embraced, and by extension, interdependency, right? And so maybe there are connections there in that particular kind of branch of Western academic thought. Thanks.
Yeah, actually, it's the African, all this stem from the African conception of who the individual is. who a person is. And the person fundamentally is a social being. What that means is you depend on others to be who you want to be. So dependency is a fact of your existence. It's not a flaw. It's a virtue, actually. And that is what will compel people to actually execute their duties to helping you flourish into a responsible adult. So it's an integral part of the Ubuntu philosophy that we are all dependent beings as persons. And that's the more reason why you should focus on ensuring the welfare of the community so that the community takes care of you.
Great, thank you, Modestha. So we're out of time, but if you have any further questions for Modestha, go catch her after this session. And now, and maybe another round of applause for Modestha.